Welcome to Saint John, Nothing Happened Here, with your host Mark Allen Green, a show all about a little city on the east coast of Canada where nothing ever happened. Except for this.
Here we go again in our search for nothing. We're off to September the 22nd, 1783, and this time we're not in Saint John. We find ourselves aboard a ship in the middle of the ocean, and this vessel has clearly seen better days. Its sails are tattered, its decks are rotting in places, and its rigging spliced so many times that it's hard to see if there's any original rope left. It is nighttime, but all is not quiet. A storm is upon us. Cold rain blown hard by the wind soaks us to the bone. Waves bash upon the hull of this aged ship, with some high enough to breach the topside and crash down hard upon the deck. We quickly grab hold of anything we can to stop us from being swept overboard and into the abyss. We see sailors staring out into the darkness, presumably keeping watch. Also, there appears to be soldiers and officers from provincial units of the British Army on board. We overhear two of them discuss what is happening. "I wish I had followed my gut and never boarded this godforsaken ship," one man says. "We're aboard now," another replies. "Just keep an eye out and hope the Martha can weather the storm until we see the light of day." Martha. Upon hearing that name, we know exactly where we are. We're on a ship headed to the Saint John Harbour. The American Revolutionary War is over, and the British have been scrambling to evacuate troops and civilians from New York City. They became quickly overwhelmed by the sheer numbers and had to procure civilian boats, like the one we are on now. There are 181 souls on board the Martha, including 21 women and 18 children. The soldiers we see on deck are from the soon-to-be disbanded Maryland Loyalist Battalion and the Ludlow Regiment of Delancey's Brigade. The captain of the Martha tried to make it to Cape Sable Island before sunset, but he was clearly overambitious. Now we are floating somewhere off the coast of the southern tip of Nova Scotia. How close to land? There's no way to tell. But the waters here are legendary, not in a good way. This area is known for violent storms, powerful currents, and rocky ledges that sit close to the surface, but are miles from shore. Hundreds of ships have met their end here, and the passengers and the crew of the Martha are praying they will not be one of them. But not all prayers are answered in the way we would like. The impact is sudden and violent. We lose our balance for a moment, but thankfully regain footing. We hear shrieks below deck and cries of children. Men, half asleep and disheveled, begin emerging onto the deck and are almost immediately thrown overboard by the violence of the storm. We hear an order to hoist the sail, possibly in an attempt to free the vessel from whatever it has become lodged upon. But the hope is quickly dashed. It is now clear that the Martha is saddled inescapably upon the rocks, being lifted off and pounded back down hard with every wave. A newer vessel would struggle to survive this battering, so the 30-year-old Martha doesn't stand a chance. All those around us are trying to hold on to some hope, but we can see that deathly worry in their eyes, that perhaps everyone aboard may soon be interred in this place known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Welcome, everyone, to the last episode of Season 2 of the podcast, with Season 3 coming back in September. My name is Mark, and over there we have our guest co-host for this episode, and it's so awesome to have him here. Sorry, I told him I wouldn't fanboy too much, but we have Andrew MacLean from Backyard History, which means it's time for Saint John. Nothing happened here, with the exception of the sinking of the Martha. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Hi there, Mark. Thanks very much for having me on here.
Well, we're glad to have you. I think you did the story in one of your weekly columns. originally?
Yeah, I have a weekly newspaper column. Newspapers still exist, and I'm in some of them. So I did this one, but they capped me with my newspaper column at 1,000 words a week. And this is, as we're going to hear, a much bigger story than 1,000 words a week.
Just a little bit.
We're going to tackle this thing on a whole wider issue, but this one's come up in two different stories in my book, Rebellious Women in the Maritimes. And one with a woman that we're going to talk about named Elizabeth Beard fought against the Americans in their revolution, and she got caught up very directly in the sinking we're going to talk about. And then a second woman who was part of the same fleet, a black woman who was also had a very different experience of departing New York City.
Absolutely. But this is an incredible story of survival. And I would say, Andrew, it demonstrates the absolute best and absolute worst of humanity with this. But let's get going with the sinking of the Martha. And I think we have to start off with the escape from New York, the first escape from New York, not the Kurt Russell escape from New York. Am I dating myself with that, Andrew?
I actually don't get that one. So
it's a great movie, 1981. I watched it a couple of weeks ago. It holds up. Escape from New York. We're just going to go briefly through that just to give some context, Andrew, to understand why we even had the Martha sailing in the first place. So we have the dying days of the Revolutionary War. And I would say 1781, with the defeat of the British in Yorktown, I would say that was the demise of the British. That was kind of the end of the war, though it continued on for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things with this one is New York, at the very end of this, was kind of a loyalist city. You think?
Oh, yeah. Last stronghold, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there was a lot of people that were very much pro-British, which New York's a pretty patriotic city now. Very not super British, I would say.
The demographics kind of changed overnight.
Yeah, so you're going to have to use your imagination some to picture this very different and very British and very loyalisty New York City that we're in at the time of the escape.
Absolutely. So in 1781, things started falling apart because the British we got defeated. And then back in Britain, they go, we've been battling this war for the last 5 years. Maybe this wasn't the best idea ever. Government started changing back and forth, and then there was a desire to end the war. So we had the negotiation, Andrew, of the Treaty of Paris. It started in 1782. There were some American negotiators who came over. There were the British, and they were going, let's strike a deal here. Now, the Loyalists you just talked about in New York City, they thought their interests were going to be protected, that the British would go, okay, well, we want to have a fair deal for the Loyalists. And especially with the return of Loyalist property that was confiscated. And this is funny. To deal with the Loyalist property, they were able to get a term that said Congress, American Congress, would make an earnest recommendation to the state legislatures to return Loyalist property. How do you think that went?
That sounds like a suggestion to me.
That's in my line of work, that's a throwaway term, right? So they made an earnest recommendation to state legislatures go, hey, will you return Loyalist property and leave them unmolested? And the legislatures go, no. No. So that was a brutal time for the Loyalists outside of New York City, where they didn't have any protection of the British Army. And they were being thrown out of their homes, land and property confiscated. And as well, they were subject to extreme violence. There were hangings. There were the tar and feathering was a very popular thing to do back then. Tar and feathering, of course, was a humiliation thing, but we don't really think of it on how brutal and cruel of a punishment that was. You had hot tar poured over you. At the best, you're going to be scarred for life. At the worst, a lot of people died from secondary infections. So this was some brutal treatment. The Loyalists in the surrounding areas go, we got to get out of here. And they started heading to where, Andrew?
They were heading into New York.
New York. So how many people came in more than expected?
Would have been the tens of thousands, right?
We had 30,000 troops in New York that needed to be evacuated because they were about to hand over the city to the Americans. And then unexpectedly, 40,000 refugees showed up saying, we want out.
Yeah, the treaty, they have a due date, right? They have a set final day where they need to get out of here, which is November.
Well, it was supposed to be September. I'll have to give Guy Carleton, he was the head of the British operations at the time, got to give him some credit. He dragged his feet to try to give them more time to get out of there, but he was supposed to be out by September. That was the eviction date. And it wasn't until November that they got the last fleet out.
I saw a memorable quote about Guy Carleton that described him as, and I quote, the only competent British leader in the American Revolution. It's probably unnecessarily flattering to the others, but he received the news that New York was going to be handed over quite late, right? Mm-hmm. He was informed by the negotiating team that all of this thing was happening on a very short timeline. So we kind of have to emphasize how quickly things are moving here, and also the sheer competence and the vast popularity of Guy Carleton in this city where nothing happens of Saint John.
Yeah,
They had considered calling it after him.
That's true, and we had the West Side was originally Carleton.
Yeah, and that, by the way, is not Thomas Carleton, New Brunswick's first governor. That is Guy Carleton.
Thanks for buying us some time, Guy, because we really needed this. If the Americans had come in, we had just talked about the violence that it had ensued. If the Americans had come in early before they had all the British evacuated, I wouldn't want to be seeing that scene.
Yeah, it's kind of helpful, I guess, to think of the American Revolution not necessarily as just a revolution, but more as a civil war. That's what really is happening with these Loyalists are longtime Americans. You can read stories about people literally finding their sibling or something like that on the other side of a battlefield, their neighbors. Mm-hmm. So you're not being tarred and feathered necessarily by strangers, but much more horrifyingly by people from your street, your neighbors who are just on the different side of a political viewpoint.
Exactly. Friends and family. So this is what happened. Everyone had to get out. Now, those with means, if you had money in your pocket, Andrew, would you be heading to Saint John, New Brunswick?
A lot of them headed to the West Indies, but a lot of them went back to England.
Mm-hmm. If you had money and family connections, and one person who had money and family connections, Ward Chipman. Ward Chipman did not spend that first winter in a tent in Saint John Harbour. He went back to Britain and came, I think, the next year when things were set up a bit more comfortable.
I just appreciate that Ward Chipman managed to worm his way into the story. This guy, it was kind of a joke with the archivists up at the Provincial Archives, where I do a lot of my research, that he has a way of just inserting himself into everything.
Oh, absolutely. He keeps on popping up. Okay, so we have Guy Carleton. He's bought some time, but we have 70,000 people to evacuate from New York City in 18th century boats. Now, these ships would hold, the biggest ones would be 400 people. Average would be around 200 people. This took 120 vessels running. If we were talking about an average of 300, which probably was a little bit high, about 250 trips to get everyone out. Now, you had the big, strong military vessels that were being used, but they ran out of them, Andrew. So what they had to do is they had to go, okay, we have to find some vessels somewhere. And they started getting civilian vessels, and they even procured them from the Americans, which must have been awkward.
Well, I think there's a lot of merchants on people's side. I think you can make money out of everything.
Politics aside, money talks.
Yeah, there's people trying to profit on other sides, remember. They're making these trips back and forth, but they're not necessarily danger-free, right? You have the risk of pirates.
Because, you see these juicy British vessels, and the Americans are out there, we just won the war. What are they going to do about it? They were ripe for the taking. But that brings us to the Martha. So the Martha was not one of those big state-of-the-art British ships, was it?
No, the Martha, I found a quote from a passenger on on the Martha named Patrick Kennedy, and he called it, and I quote here, a crazy old vessel with patched sails and 1,000 splicings in the riggings. The vessel was 30 years old, her sails and rigging in bad order, and very unfit for the weather.
That is not a ringing endorsement.
No. It doesn't sound like one that's going to do well in the case of a storm that may or may not hit.
May or may not. No spoilers, Andrew. No spoilers. Okay. We have the Martha, and it was being used in the 5th Fleet, and that was the fall fleet leaving New York in September. So not the final fleet, but it was getting there. It took about 2 weeks to sail from New York City to Nova Scotia, which is the Saint John Harbour, which was Nova Scotia at the time. Okay, we have Kennedy not saying much good about the Martha. And who had to get on board this ship you just described?
So we have a lot of there's soldiers that had fought in it. It was Clancy's brigade, was it?
Yep, it was Ludlow's New York Regiment, part of Delancey's brigade, and the Maryland Loyalist Battalion.
And we do have detailed listings of the people that were on board this, so we can mention specific numbers. But something that I keep seeing come up from different sources is that these ships are often overloaded. So there was this sense of desperation in New York. There's only so many fleets left. So more people were going on than are necessarily listed on there. There's a tendency to exaggeration, but I've seen as many as double. So we have precise sets of numbers, which are probably fewer than the number of people that are actually on this.
Exactly. So kind of registered guest versus the ones that just jumped on it at the last minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you can sense the palpable desperation of people wanting out.
No, exactly. To talk about some numbers of how many people were aboard this, we had 181 passengers, and it seems, Andrew, 5 crew and 1 captain, and soldiers from the soon-to-be disbanded Maryland Loyalist Battalion and the Ludlow New York Regiment and their families. So we had 21 women, 18 children, and 10 enslaved people. So still under the bondage of slavery. They're getting on board this, Andrew. And I'm guessing they're having the same reaction Kennedy had, saying to themselves, is this the best boat to be getting on? But desperation, right?
Yeah, this is desperation. This is very close to the end. It was being handed over to the Americans who were moving into New York City peacefully. This wasn't a battle that was being fought on the streets, but the ship was departing as the Americans were moving into the city. And I found it really amusingly petty description of before the British departed, they ran up a big British flag over the harbor, and they were in their ships sailing away, and they could see this British flag, and they greased the flagpole. So they couldn't get it down. So all these American soldiers were trying to climb up this greased flagpole to get down this thing. And one of the last things they saw as the ship sailed out of sight was the Americans had pulled down their flag. Very, very deeply symbolic.
There's a lot going on in New York right now, but we got to get out of there. We're getting on to this ship. Now, it has the 181 passengers, as we talked about, and it's loaded with supplies, things that they would need for survival when they got to the wilderness. Now, I don't think they were quite told that it was going to be as barren as it ended up being, but they had things like saws, axes, implements of husbandry. So all those things that they needed to survive. So that's an important thing about when we look at what was lost or might be lost, again, not getting ahead of ourselves with any spoilers, all their property, all their money, all of their supplies. Now it's time to go. There were 12 boats that left to form that convoy up, or flotilla. Is it flotilla or a convoy with ships? Let's go with convoy.
Yes, I'll defer to you.
It's a good old convoy. Okay, so it's going up, and they have to get through the Narrows, going around, I think it's Sandy Hook. Now, what happened to the Martha when it was trying to make it through the Narrows?
Its sail just ripped right in two. The mainsail split right in two, and the Martha kind of pulled off to the side to do repairs.
Pulled off the side of the road?
Yeah, basically. And remember, there's a fleet. There's 12 ships, right? And the other 11 ships decided to continue on. There was already, by this point, a storm brewing. The decision would be that waiting could doom the entire fleet. So the Martha was left behind to do repairs. The repairs seemed to go surprisingly quick. The next day, they had repaired a mainsail, which was split in two, which sounds pretty impressive.
No surprise about that mainsail, because again, the description that we had about the quality of the ship, so it didn't make it even past the Narrows, got repaired. Then we're going off the Nova Scotia. They got up to what would become Maine eventually. And then they had to go over to Nova Scotia to the southern tip, so that Cape Sable area. They tried to make it all the way to Cape Sable from Maine before the sunset. Now, that was probably ambitious of the captain, trying to make it there. They were getting into the dying daylight, and supposedly the captain saw land, saw the southern tip of Nova Scotia. Now, what would be the prudent thing to do? Dying daylight, that's a very dangerous area, southern coast of Nova Scotia. So lots of rocks way out, like miles and miles away from the actual shore. They're going to be coming up just below the surface, above the surface. What would you do, Andrew, as a prudent captain? If you go, well, we can't make it to land, what would you do?
I'm going to show my lack of sailing experience and say, I don't know whether it would be safer, whether I would go closer to the land or stay in the middle of the sea with a storm bearing down on me. What would you do, Mark?
Well, supposedly with the accusations that for later in 2020 hindsight, maybe, you would get away from land. You would head back out the sea, wait for daylight. Did this captain do that?
No, he did not.
No, he just stayed there. And then that storm came upon that you just said, and it was a brutal storm. What is the first thing the storm did to the poor old Martha?
So I have 2 a.m. was when disaster struck. So we had what is happening between the dying of the light and the middle of the night.
As you're saying, a huge gale comes in, which is not surprising for September in that area. And this area is prone to huge storms coming from nowhere. And that mainsail. So the storm sets upon it and the mainsail gets ripped again. They got it underway back in the Narrows, but not the best repair. It gets ripped in half again in the middle of the storm. I can't imagine doing this. They had to repair the mainsail. And they successfully did it. So that's at midnight, and Captain Kennedy, he's not the captain of the ship. It's Captain Willis is the captain of the ship. The military captain, Captain Kennedy, he was helping out, and everyone was helping out. And they go, okay, finally, I got to go get some shut-eye. And then give us 2 a.m. So when Captain Kennedy finally got below decks, get some dry clothes because it's a storm.
Yeah, so Patrick Kennedy decided in the midst of this massive storm to go to sleep. And he wrote that at 2 a.m., and I quote, "I had just closed my eyes to an easy slumber when the vessel struck. I jumped instantly upon the deck. We found she was saddled upon the rocks without a hope of getting her off." So the ship had run aground on a rock. We're in the Seal Island, Nova Scotia area, so we're outside the Bay of Fundy.
This place is known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Okay, this is a very dangerous place to be in a storm. Shouldn't have been so close to land. They get saddled on that rock, as you said, and there was hope to begin with. So the captain actually thought, okay, I can get off of this rock. It's not that bad. I think the line Kennedy said that the captain gave to them, it's not that bad. We can get off this thing. And they tried and they failed, and it was hopelessly locked. Now, this is incredible. Remember, we're talking about a 30-year-old vessel. Every wave was lifting it off the rock and then slamming it back down again. Lifting off, slam. Lifting off, slam. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, it sounds definitely pretty brutal. I think I was pretty struck by how the way that they decided to try and lift it off, which was to send some people out in a longboat to, I guess, push it off. I'm not quite sure what they were going to do with the crew. So a longboat would be a extra big rowboat, right? and they just set a bunch of men and the crew out to, I don't know, push it off. Would that have been the plan?
The plans kept on changing. It was fluid. First thing the captain admitted while this thing was on the rock, guys, I don't really know anything about the coastline in this area. I have no idea about the hazards. So you can imagine what Kennedy would have been like at the time going, really? You took us here and you had no idea, no knowledge of the dangers of this. When it was originally stuck, they tried to use the pump. So the captain was supposedly stupefied, in the words of Kennedy. He wasn't really being compelled to action. He was manning the pumps, just trying to pump the water out of this thing and going, oh, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And then the bottom breaks out of it. So there goes the hope. But the light of day comes, Andrew. The light of day comes and they see where they are. How far are they from the coast?
Was it 6 miles?
6 miles.
It's not like a swimming distance.
It's not a swimming distance. It's not. Okay, tell me this. What would be better? Like seeing it 6 miles away or not seeing it at all? It's kind of like, Alcatraz in San Francisco, that you're so close, but you're yet so far. What would your thoughts be in the light of day seeing the shore 6 miles away?
Yeah, there's really nothing good happening at this point.
My heart would have sunk. And no spoilers to what's going to happen to the Martha. But as you're saying, they had that longboat. So that was the hope, was the longboat. And that's a long row, 6 miles. The captain was finally saying, okay, there's no hope here. We have to abandon ship. So the longboat goes down and it's ready to bring on the first passengers. I should say this too, before that jolly boat. They put in the crew. So 5 of the crew went in, and then they rowed about 100 yards away. And remember, there's a storm still going on. These are brutal waves bashing at the ship, rain pouring down, high winds. They get 100 yards away, and then they wait for the longboat to be prepared to receive passengers. And the plan was this, Andrew: take the smaller boat and then tow it to land with the passengers aboard and keep on doing that as many times as they possibly could to rescue people. That was the plan. And this is, again, a calamity after calamity. What happened to the longboat as soon as one person tried to board it?
That's when the main mast snapped.
And where did it land perfectly upon? It could have landed anywhere, right, Andrew?
Yeah, it just crashed directly down onto the longboat. So they have one jolly boat, a little one. They have one big longboat, kind of their greatest hope, right? And the main mast just snaps, falls right down on top of it. It seemed like people had been holding it together fairly well, according to Patrick Kennedy, until this point. And this was really, we'll use his words, not my own. He said that seeing the main mast crash onto this longboat dashed our one remaining hope, our only resource, the longboat, into pieces.
And some people started panicking and jumping overboard to try to get on that mast. I think we have to describe this just a little bit, Andrew, the conditions. So we're in the middle of the storm in September. The water temperatures, so average water temperatures at that time of year in that area would be 13 degrees Celsius to 18 degrees Celsius. And what we know is 21 degrees Celsius water, that's dangerous water, dangerously cold, because 25 times faster heat loss in water than in air. So if you're getting down, because you might go, well, on a 13 to 18 degree day, that's not that bad. In the water, that is really bad. And what can happen too is the cold shock. So as soon as you enter the water, there is that risk that you might die immediately or almost immediately from cold shock, where your heart rate increases so fast, blood pressure, that you have a cardiac event. And supposedly that's what happened to a lot of people who tried to swim toward that main mast, and had nothing to do with their swimming abilities. It was just that surviving that first couple of minutes in a cold plunge is extremely important. People started dying. We had the 5 sailors out in that boat 100 yards away. Now, what did they do? They came back for us, right? So we're on the Martha, Andrew. We're going to pretend we're part of the passengers on this, and we see, okay, there's 5 sailors aboard. We can get some people aboard that and try to save some people. What did they do? They refused to come back and help us. This is a traumatic event because there's children on board. So supposedly women were holding up their screaming children saying, please, please come back. And they absolutely refused to come back. That's when Captain Willis jumped into action and he goes, don't worry, we got one more boat. I can get them to come back. So Captain Willis and a couple of the soldiers will get on to row out to them to convince them to come back to help. Then what happened? The worst of humanity.
This one's being lowered down. Patrick Kennedy, our diarist, I guess, was one of the people that were helping lower this boat. And he said that just as it got down to the water, Captain Willis, and I quote Patrick Kennedy, forgot his promises. He leapt over the rail and got himself safe on board and rode away. So just to clarify, the ship's captain had stolen the only lifeboat to escape alone, abandoning his ship and everyone on it.
This is where it gets despicable. This is absolutely, well, the whole thing's despicable, don't get me wrong. But Captain Willis goes out in that smaller little boat that could have saved a few people, right? Not everyone, but could have saved a few people, got out to the boat that had the 5 sailors on it, and then he let the other boat just go. I saw one account that he actually scuttled it. Captain screams of women, children, men, and just ignored it and rowed away. What are your thoughts about motivation? Just cowardness? Trying to cover up negligence?
Yeah, I don't know. I really have no idea. His later actions just kind of like confuse everything even more. Obviously, the figure of speech is not that a captain should, in a moment of panic, abandon his ship and everyone on it and flee for safety alone. They're supposed to go down with their ship. I don't know. I've got nothing. This is not something you encounter very often in maritime history. What do you think his motivation is, Mark?
Well, there's speculation. We'll get into it later on because there's a guy who had a theory. He was one of the survivors who had quite a scandalous theory. I don't think it's backed up. With me, I was looking at it originally and going, okay, it's to hide his incompetence because gross incompetence and the charges he would likely face for all of those things about going too close to land, how he handled the vessel, everything like that. So he would certainly be in trouble. And maybe it was just panic, right? Maybe just pure panic, save my own life.
Yeah, I still can't think of any other examples off the top of my head of an act of cowardice on the scale of Captain Willis here.
And just evil, right? Not even going, here you go. Like, at least I'm going to try to get this ship back to you, this other smaller boat, but just going, no, I'm out of here. Now, what happened, and this is interesting, I don't know how this played out, but some of the men from the ship, the soldiers, jumped overboard and swam out to the captain and the 5 sailors. 3 of them were taken on board and they all went off. So there would have been 3 soldiers there saying, hey, why don't you go back? Or one would believe, and they didn't. Or would those men have just been so frozen and couldn't have done anything?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is the whole thing where we're taught from swimming classes on as kids that people drowning are dangerous. So when we think about the ship as how many passengers are on it, how overloaded it was, and these people jumping into the water, in the captain's defense, if you've got like 50 of these people swimming towards you and you're in a little boat, I probably still wouldn't have done that. But yeah, it would have looked pretty different, I guess, on his position.
We have to say we weren't there. And thank goodness we were not there. I wouldn't have survived. I probably wouldn't have got past the Narrows myself. But I certainly wouldn't have survived long. So they're off now. It's survival time for us, Andrew. So the ship is starting to break apart. We're on the deck. The bottom is smashed out. Everyone is trying to hold on, and the waves are just smashing over the top of this thing and threatening to rip us off of the ship into the abyss and never heard of again. We're grabbing onto about anything we can, aren't we, Andrew, to try to just hold on. But can you imagine in the storm, September, those temperatures and the waves hitting you again and again? How long do you think you would survive? I'm already dead, by the way. I said I conceded this.
We don't have to imagine it because we have a very vivid description of it by Patrick Kennedy. He says, "Here, my dear friend, the powers of description fail." And then he goes on to vividly describe the whole thing. So imagine, if you will, yourself in the middle of this scene. "Words are inadequate to express the fresh consternation, the despair of my unfortunate comrades. What a dismal sight! What a melancholy spectacle! A sudden burst of lamentation, a general cry of distress was heard from every part of the decks. The people running about distracted, not knowing what they did, some jumping overboard upon the wreck of the masts and the yards alongside, others preparing to lash spars and planks together to form a raft and commit themselves to the mercy of Providence." So we are seeing, in the midst of the chaos, some people are panicking and jumping overboard and having heart attacks from the shock of the cold, but you have other people that are trying to take the pieces of this boat and lash them into, I guess you can maybe visualize that famous painting, the raft of the Medusa, for what they are struggling to together in the midst of this. And still remember, the storm is still happening around them. The weather hasn't led up to make their mission any easier.
No, we're not feeling the sun on our faces right now, right? Like a complete full-on storm. This is what seems to happen. It was kind of hard to figure out from the narrative, but the deck was holding on, and there were the three main parts. There would have been the aft, the bows, and then the middle section. And then they split apart. They're still holding on to this thing, but then a big wave came and flipped those pieces upside down. Everyone went into the water. Women, children, men. A lot of people didn't make it, but now they're trying to clamber on to those remaining floating pieces. And we'll take it from the Kennedy perspective. There's a couple other perspectives that will happen, but the Kennedy one, now the thing's flipped over, Andrew. There's nothing to hold on to. You have to get onto this thing. And I find this just amazing. So 25 people were able to climb aboard one of these pieces that remained, including 2 women and 3 children, but nothing to hold on to. And every wave started pushing them off. So wave upon wave, pushing them closer to the edge of this, off the edge. And every 3 minutes, according to Kennedy, they would get thrown off this makeshift raft and have to clamber aboard. And this went on for 3 hours, being knocked off of this thing every 3 minutes and having to use all your energy. How would you survive? How did anyone survive that?
Well, with great difficulty, I guess. Not that many did. There would have been a lot of people who did not make it by this point, like literally surrounding these people. The scale of how harrowing this situation is really cannot be understated.
It really can't. And just to give survival times, I did look up the survival times of that kind of average 15 degrees Celsius, 6 hours maximum, but your survival time would be 1 to 6 hours. And having 3 hours of that, and then the dog. So there was the ship's dog who managed to get on this raft that had the Kennedy and the 25 people aboard. And it was a big dog. It was a big pointer. And the people tried to beat it off because there wasn't the room on this raft. And what did the dog keep on doing?
The dog did not take the hint and did not depart. So the dog stayed on. The dog was not a welcome guest for space concerns at the beginning. But the people decided that they just had this dog now, and it was just there. I saw a quote by one. They said that the dog, the fact that it was there, would later become a source of great hope for them. We have, yes, a somewhat unwanted large dog at the beginning. The dog refuses to take a hint to leave, and the dog becomes their friend and sort of a symbol of hope. And as far as I'm aware, the dog's name was never mentioned.
Dog's name is never mentioned.
Yeah, so we just have a large dog.
We have a large dog and 25 people, and everyone, including the dog, getting thrown off every 3 minutes and having to get back on. Now, there are other rafts in that area at the time, but 3 hours, they start drifting away. And you can imagine that starting to get separated from people, because there would be some comfort in being in a bigger group. But then this is heartbreaking. This is absolutely heartbreaking. The women and children aboard Kennedy's raft start slipping away one at a time. And they would have given into hypothermia. So it would have been that fatigue, that stupor, drowsiness, then convulsions, and then just letting go. And having to see that happen over and over again. We often don't talk about this when we're talking about history events, is the psychological component of it, on how hard it would be. Sometimes when we're thinking about history, it's like, oh, these people are just more strong than we are and they're used to death and all this. No, they were not. They would have been absolutely traumatized by this. But one at a time they started going, and then Kennedy is almost done. So he has slipped off so many times. He is about to go into that stupor, fall off the raft, and then a hand comes out, Andrew, a hand, and that is William Stafford. He's the surgeon of the regiment, and extend a hand out, and he pulls back Kennedy and gives him that kind of strength to keep on going. But then the next wave comes, and Stafford is thrown off the raft, and Kennedy watches him float away. We'll get back to him. But now we're 6 hours in the water, and we're down to 10. We've lost 15 people.
So I just want to go back for a second to mentioning you mentioned the women and the children slipping away and the psychological impact. Well, the person we're quoting most often, Patrick Kennedy, here with this lengthy, very vivid letter soon after he got to shore. And he never mentions anything about his family in this letter. But his wife and his only child, a young daughter, were both with him on this trip. And as far as I could find, I don't think he ever mentioned them again, like in his life, which could say something to the psychological impact. But they were on this ship with him, and they did not make it. So, I mean, you could read this in a way that kind of says that people back then were used to death and uncaring, but I think I would probably choose to see this as a really deep psychological impact on an individual. The fact that they're not talking about it rather than something uncaring, that they're just burying it away.
That's the same take I had. His wife and only daughter died and doesn't mention it, but I don't think he could. He couldn't bring himself to mention that at all. Like, that would plague him till his dying day, that he wasn't able to save them. So that would have been horrible on him. But finally, after 6 hours, Andrew, the storm subsides at least. Are we okay now? The storm is past.
Well, everything is not magically okay. You're still at sea in a raft. It would be improving, I guess, but you're still soaking wet. There's no sign of help anywhere on the way. I mean, this isn't a time. Flare guns were probably invented earlier than you think, but it's definitely not any time around where we have. You're also in an area you have to remember that you've never been in before and don't know anything about. If you're in New York, or you're probably middle class, a merchant, if you're on this fleet, and you're off in the middle of the waters off the coast of some foreign lands.
Have you ever been in a really bad storm where you can't get inside and you're just soaked?
Yeah, I suppose so.
I've been in that situation. I'm freezing, I'm shivering, I feel like I'm going to die, but they're on the ocean. And they've just been through all of that. They're drained. And 6 hours of this, they see that the raft seems to be going closer to shore. So possibly that was a bit of the hope that kept them going. But then this is incredible. They've been out there all day and the sun starts setting. Remember when this all began? 2 a.m. So now the sun has risen and the sun is setting. They're still on the water. But then they realize this. They're not getting closer to shore. They're going away. And that's when they go, if we do not keep this raft, at least staying still, we'll be swept out of the sea and gone. They started taking turns throughout that night, taking a piece of wood and taking turns paddling, not to get closer to shore, just to keep from being swept out to sea. Can you imagine that? Like how drained you would be and then having to put that on top of it.
Yeah, it's a really remarkable story. Well, in most respects, it's a horror story, but you can also turn this around. It's just a story of the incredible survival abilities of humans that anyone made it through this at all.
The desire to live is so ingrained that it can triumph over something like this. But then Kennedy, night has fallen. Let's bring back in the dog. How did the dog save Kennedy's life?
This is a large dog, and Kennedy described it as a very warm dog. Kennedy hugged the dog all night, and Kennedy gave credit to the dog's warmth as keeping him partly alive, but also the fact that he was referring to it floating. So I don't think that they're out of the water the whole time.
No, and the dog actually helped them stay out of the water because he kind of held on to his back. So the dog was submerged partially in water, presumably, and so were the other people, but he kind of just went on to the dog. I don't think it was really the survival thing. It was just kind of, I'm just holding on, and this is kind of working out. That's what I got from the narrative. It wasn't like, he's my dog. No one else can take the dog. It was just more like, I'm just going to hold on to the dog, whether we make it through the night or not.
I was picturing it more as like a more tragic figure of this man that had just lost his wife and his daughter. Clinging to this dog was how I was visualizing this whole thing. I mean, not our happiest story.
It's not a happy story, but then the sun rises again, Andrew, and now they're down to 6. So they watched 19 other people, including women and children, die over this experience. The sun rises and land is farther away, still visible, but farther away. So they really haven't made any traction, but they did stop themselves from being lost at sea. And then they spent all day, Andrew, all day again, and night started to fall once again. Remember when this all started 2 days before, or almost 2 days at 2 a.m. Night's falling again. Then I can imagine what this would have been like. They see 3 white images out on the water. They probably would have been delusional at this point, that they saw these things, and then someone said, I think they're sails. I think they're sails. We're going to be saved. And another person, they're rocks, dude. They're just rocks.
They're white rocks.
Please, I can't take any more hope being dashed. They're just rocks. But what were they?
They were, in fact, actually sails. It was some fishermen. So these would not have been big vessels at all, but they came closer and closer. And this would be at risk to the fishermen themselves trying to get close with these fishermen, who I saw one source that said that they were Francophones, meaning Acadians, which would have also been, in the context of the time, quite unusual. But they came over and they rescued these people.
And they did. The people on the raft, they were worried that they were not going to get spotted. So they were trying, and they wouldn't have had any strength left. And they were just trying to wave them down. And the fishermen saw them. They came in. They rescued them. 68 were eventually rescued, including 6 women, 5 children. This was a heartbreaking one, though. They saw one man who was on a separate raft by himself, and he was screaming at them, saying, please help me, help me, help me. He was too close to the rocks, so they could not go in and get him. And he screamed and screamed and screamed and just drifted away. They could not grab him, but they did save a lot of people. This is a heartbreaking one, Andrew. Tell us about the dog.
Yeah, so as if this story was not sad enough already, I have bad news about the dog. This dog that they didn't want became their totem of hope. Literally, its warmth tried to save them. The dog refused to be rescued. I guess it didn't like the rescuers. It didn't want to get near them, and they tried to pull the dog off of the raft. It would not go off of the raft. It was trying to bite the people. And eventually, the dog floated away on the raft alone. So as if everything was not sad enough, it gets worse with the dog floated away.
And Kennedy pleaded with them when he got on board, going, save that dog, because he saved my life. And that would have been heartbreaking getting the news. We tried, but we couldn't. He wouldn't let us. And it possibly could have been because, remember, he was beaten. Originally, when he got on that, he might have thought he was being thrown off again and not rescued. Who knows, right? And the dog would have been through a lot, but no, the dog didn't make it. So that's them being rescued, and they were taken off to an island later on. And big bonfire started to warm them up, and I can't imagine what that would have been like trying to recover from this. But we got other people. There was our friend William Stafford. Now, he was swept off. He got onto another raft. So what happened with that raft? That raft ended up being in the water longer, and it was not rescued by a boat. So can you tell us about that raft and who else was on it?
This is the raft that was on 2 days for 2 nights.
Yeah.
And then it drifts onto a deserted island.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're going from, well, I mean, at least you're on land. That's something. And despite it being September, apparently there were still some berries around, and there were also snails.
Yeah. So they lived for 7 days before they were discovered on this deserted island. So let's just think about that for a second. Hope and then hope dashed. Would you say, like, you were on the water for close to 3 days, you get to land, you go, oh, thank goodness we're on land. But as the days start ticking by, like day 1, day 2, day 3, there's only so many snails, Andrew, and the raspberries aren't looking any better.
No, but I mean, look, you would be pretty grateful to be off of that raft. I would be thinking twice about getting on a ship again after that. But yeah, I suppose you would probably think you're on the mainland at first and then come to the realization that, oh, you're on an island.
And there's nothing. But who else was on that? And this is an incredible part of the story. Elizabeth Beard. She was on it, but what condition was she in?
So Elizabeth Beard is a whole different, very long story. She was a very young woman. At the age of 15, she had been on a ship that was ambushed by the revolutionaries, British ship, and she manned the cannons and fought against them. And afterwards, the British landed, and some of the crew defected to the revolutionaries, and others were captured. And then she was part of a group that attacked the revolutionaries, and as well as liberating the crew, she also helped herself to an American officer's horse, which she sold to a British officer at a profit. So she's kind of a combatant businesswoman, this teenage girl named Elizabeth Beard. She was caught in another one, manning cannons again during a siege way down in Florida, and she had gotten part of a prisoner transfer and was moved to New York City, and she was traveling with another husband who was with Delancey's brigade. So at this point in the story, she was traveling out. She was part of this final fleet aboard the Martha, leaving New York City. She has a baby. She is also extremely pregnant with triplets. So we're talking like extremely pregnant. So think of everything that we've gone through with this whole story, but then apply being pregnant with triplets and having a baby in this trip. So she had made it to the end, and she had survived this whole thing. And at the point where they are finally getting rescued and all these things, she goes into labor. So she just made it to a beach in Nova Scotia, dropped there by, I believe, these fishermen, and then she gives birth on a stony Nova Scotian beach to these triplets, all of which apparently were healthy children.
I don't even know what to say on this. One thing, is she the female version of John MacLean from Die Hard?
I know, this is ridiculous. The whole, the things she has experienced in her life.
It's quite the story. Again, in your book, a must buy and must read. So let's just get this straight. Almost 3 days at sea, holding a baby. The baby survives. So she's able to not only, under all those conditions, keep herself alive, she's pregnant with triplets, and she makes it, gets to land, and delivers triplets. And this is the 18th century, and they're all healthy.
Yeah, and everyone survives somehow. So there we found a happy silver lining to the whole thing. A little glimmer of hope, courtesy of Elizabeth Beard, who I think at this point in the story, she's only like 21 or something like that, 22 years old. So
you can't write this stuff. If we tried to pitch this as a fiction story, they would go, no, this is unbelievable. No. No audience will watch this. Like, come on, like it gets somewhere in the realm of reality, but no. Give you the tally of this. So fatalities, 113 people died. We need to talk about this. The enslaved people, all the enslaved people died. Any theories about that? I did a little bit of research into it, and certainly they would not have been the number one concern.
I'm not sure. I hadn't found anything about what had happened to them.
We don't know about that, but we know that none of them survived. Not a single enslaved person survived. But the fatalities, 75 soldiers, officers, 15 women died, 13 children died, 10 enslaved persons. And we should be talking about this. You go, okay, well, 68 people did survive. Did they survive unscathed? Psychologically, no. But being at sea that long and submerged in cold water, we would have been talking about serious neurological damage. There would have been likely lifelong pain from the nerve damage that they would have received, cardiovascular issues. So what I want to do is I'm going to reach out after this episode gets aired to our good friends of the podcast, the New Brunswick Genealogical Society, and see if anyone has any information about the survivors that they may have traced back their family history, have something that has not made the official record. I would love to know what happened to them and what the impact. Then we had the survivors that we said about taking them to an uninhabited island and then eventually getting them the main shore. But that's when reality sets in about what they lost. So there was the human life that was the number one concern on everyone, like mourning the loss. But what else did they lose?
Quite literally everything. So going back to the Patrick Kennedy example, he does mention in his letter to his friend that he lost all of his possessions. And this would have been the same thing for everyone. So these people are headed to Saint John, what was at the time called Partown. And there would have been already a few fleets of people that had been there, that had been arriving since spring, but they had been basically left on the shore of a place where there had been very little land cleared, let alone a city. So they go into a place where you need stuff. A bit of a quote here. One of the earliest from the spring fleet, one of the first people to arrive in Partown was someone named Walter Bates. And he said that they were greeted in Saint John with nothing but wilderness before our eyes. And he said that as soon as they saw the land that they're going to be settling in, the women and children did not refrain from tears. So this is to say that losing all of your worldly possessions doesn't mean that you're like a little bit short on cash for a bit. This is something you're going to desperately need when you get to your new home of what is now Saint John.
Bring back in Guy Carleton. I'll have to give him another shout out for doing the right thing because he heard about what happened and he asked for an extra pay for the soldiers, 60 pounds and blankets for the survivors. So to send them some assistance. So the 60 pounds was enough to charter a boat to Saint John. So they got from the southern shore of Nova Scotia back to their destination. Now we'll just leave that reuniting everyone in Saint John for a bit. We got to talk about the captain and the crew. So this was going on as everyone was hanging on to these rafts. But the captain and the crew make it to the shore. And what happened? Andrew, tell me that they said, please send help. There are 181 people out there who will die. Send the boats.
Yeah, so that's not the version that Captain Willis told. It is very different from the true story that later came out. He was telling it like it was a heroic tale of the captain fighting against the odds to save everyone. He really put himself at the forefront of the story. He was the big hero in the way he told it. And he was really trying to spread this around really fast. I think it even made it to back to New York City, didn't it?
It did, before the truth. It's funny how lies can sometimes be faster than the truth, and his lies certainly were. So he said the main mast broke, which was true, but killed everyone instantly. But he tried. Oh, did he try? He tried. He almost killed himself trying.
Yeah, I know. Like, he deserves a lot of accolades for all of his heroics, is the story he told.
Exactly, but he's told the townspeople, but it's important you do this. Don't even try a rescue. It's too dangerous out there. Too dangerous. Don't try. I'm telling you, everyone is dead, sadly. Rest in peace, everyone. So, like, he actually discouraged. Like, this is, again, the worst of humanity. He discouraged anyone from trying, and people could have been saved.
Yeah, I guess we'd have the other psychological thing where people tend to favor stories that you hear first. So you kind of have that going on too when other people are telling contrary stories. Survivors of this actual shipwreck that are being like, okay, so this guy was not a hero, but you can find some really, I don't know if you can even exaggerate the cowardice of the Captain Willis.
No, I don't think you could. I challenge you to try to exaggerate that. It can't be done. I think this is what the captain wanted. He wanted it to be true in that everyone was dead, but they weren't. So then the truth came out, and there was what I would call akin to a warrant put out for the captain, and it seemed like the captain and two crew members did make their way to New York, probably expecting a ticker tape parade, though there wasn't ticker tape back then, but a ticker tape parade in their honor. And then they got the accusations against them. 3 accusations. Willis was negligent in continuing to sail night after sighting land so near. He willfully abandoned the passengers, and once on shore, he discouraged the local inhabitants from going out to rescue the ship's castaways. Damning accusations.
Check, check, check.
Check, check, check. Guilty, guilty, guilty of all of those. And then after those came in, he disappeared forever. And we have no idea what happened to Captain Willis. He did not receive justice, at least in this life.
Yeah, he just kind of disappeared
into the wind. And then this is the conspiracy theory. So we have one man, one survivor, Joseph Carroll. He survived incredibly by kind of build a raft while he was in the water, taking some debris and putting it together with some rope that he cut with 2 things, a rusty razor and his teeth. That is a will to survive. And he survived, but he brought an accusation, and the accusation against the captain was the captain intentionally ran the vessel into the rocks for the insurance money. That was the accusation. Now, I like a good conspiracy theory, and I kind of looked into this, Andrew. From what I've seen, not likely would a vessel like this have been insured. There was maritime insurance back then. There was the predecessor of Lloyd's of London, but I don't imagine that they would have put a big insurance policy on an evacuation vessel that was 30 years old. I almost wanted it to be true, because it kind of explains, like, the cowardness is almost inconceivable, right? And then if you go, even if there's a money motive, then you could go, okay, I see how this could happen. I don't condone it. I don't like it, but there's something to it. But what do you think about the conspiracy?
I really don't know enough about the legalities of insurance money, but I would think, like, there would probably be easier ways to make money. There's a very close call for Captain Willis himself to have survived. This would be a really tough way to make money and come out alive. I don't know. You're more of the legal expert than me. What do you think? Any would this hold up?
No. I hate to say it. Like, I think Joseph Carroll, rightfully so, was just so angry, right? And just wanted to throw Captain Willis under the bus as far as he could possibly throw him under the and start spreading around this thing. He probably believed it to be true. Like, I'm not saying that he made it up. It doesn't seem to hold water. I shouldn't probably use that term with this one, but you know what I'm saying. So this was not the only shipwreck from those evacuation fleets. There were estimated 40 other shipwrecks during this evacuation, but this certainly would have been the most disastrous of all of them. But let's go back to Saint John, when the survivors of the Martha started to congregate on there wasn't really any wharves at the time in Partown, the soon-to-be Saint John, but they started congregating in Saint John. And this was before any sort of telegraphs or anything, so they would not have known who survived, who did not. But Captain Kennedy comes off a vessel, and who was there to greet him in Saint John? Who was there?
William Stafford was there.
Yes.
The surgeon. Remember the hand that saved him when he was falling off and he was dying, but got swept away soon after. So William Stafford, against all odds, managed to survive, find another raft, and live, and then meet Kennedy in St. John, which is another statistical improbability, to say the least.
Absolutely incredible. So the emotions that he would have had, seeing the person who saved him, thinking that he was dead, all happening in what would become St. John, New Brunswick. And that is the podcast. And proof, Andrew, once again, St. John, nothing happened here.
Thank you for listening to Saint John, Nothing Happened Here. To learn more, join us at www.nothinghappenedhere.ca or connect with us on Facebook. Other means of communication include, but are not limited to, telegrams, smoke signals, and carrier pigeons. However you want to reach us, we want to hear from you.